Welcome to another episode of the Veterans of the Cedar Valley. We are planning on taping about 20 of these shows which would be of interest to veterans, issues that affect them, programs where they can learn about benefits and stuff. This is our 10th show of the 20. Today we have in the studio Miss Hannah Ackerman, who is going to be our guest for the show. And Hannah is going to be performing in the second half of this show her award-winning play. Welcome to the show, Hannah.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you. Just why don't you give us, Hannah, a little brief review or biography of yourself and how things have come up to this point with you.
Well, I am a 2014 graduate of Cedar Falls High School. I first got involved with veterans through my National History Day competitions, performing at veterans events, dedications, and reunions. And I am the past president of Junior AMVETS Post 49, and I will be an auxiliary member of Post 49.
How long did you serve as the president of the Junior AMVETS in Cedar Falls?
I served 2 terms for the presidency. And
now you're out of the Junior AMVETS and into the auxiliary there?
Yes, I am a graduate.
Okay, because you're too old to be a Junior AMVET.
Yes, I'm too old.
All right, good. Hannah, right to the point today, the program that you're going to do later on, a little performance that won you an award in the State Historical Day at Des Moines, is about an incident that occurred in the U.S. Navy back in the Vietnam War. Can you just kind of briefly tell us what the play is going to be about?
The play is about this naval ship called the USS Frankie Evans DD-754. It was a naval destroyer that served during the Vietnam War. In 1969, while practicing war maneuvers, the Evans and the HMAS Melbourne ships collided, and the Evans was cut in half. And 74 men were killed, and there was 199 survivors.
Well, how they were killed in the, if I got this right, the Gulf of Tonkin during the Vietnam War, and they were, they were sent out to maneuvers or practice or something? Explain that part.
They were sent out to practice like a submarine maneuver in like a zigzag pattern, and then early one morning, 3:15 a.m. to be precise, there was a change of station maneuvers, and then the Evans and Melbourne ships collided. It was a calm morning, so it wasn't very expected, and the Evans was cut in half, and then the bow of the ship was sunk into the sea, and then 74 men were pulled down, including an ancestor of mine, Ronald Arthur Thibodeau.
So you've done some research on the issue, and I think there's a USS Evans Association that meets every year to try to keep this issue alive in the minds of the American public. What is that issue?
The issue is the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. was constructed in the 1980s. And former crewmen, family, and friends were shocked to find out one thing, that none of the 74 names that were killed were ever allowed on the Vietnam Wall. And they've been trying for many years, the association, to get this right, and many times legislation has failed until recently in 2014 when they have made some progress. So
out of the association's efforts, they meet yearly in a convention somewhere. Is that how you got involved here about this issue, trying to help get these names on the Vietnam Wall?
Yes, I got involved in 2011 when my mom and I were in Jacksonville, Florida at Mayport Naval Station. I was going to perform another play that I do on the 5 Sullivan brothers for the captain and crew of the USS The Sullivans DDG-68. We got a call from Mr. Steve Krause, the vice president of the association, and asked me to perform this at their 19th reunion in Waterloo at the 5 Sullivan Brothers Convention Center. There I met a lot of former Evans crewmen, heroic accident survivors, family and friends, and even members of the HMAS Melbourne. And then when I learned that their names were never allowed on the Vietnam Memorial Wall, I was shocked and I thought this was wrong and I just couldn't believe it. In fact, last year in 2013, I helped put together a resolution with the help of the Evans Association.
And that resolution, in reading the material, was that resolution to go to the Iowa legislature and Senate and then on up to, say, Washington for action?
I started off in the Iowa level with Senator Danielson and Representative Krasig, and hopefully when that gets passed through the Iowa floor, hopefully that would go to the national floor and I would help the Evans get their glory.
Well, maybe with the connection that Senator Danielson has as an old Navy veteran, maybe that'll help. And I think Iowa has an interest in making this wrong a right. Is there any other, Hannah, is there any other incidences during the Vietnam War years of soldiers or sailors who were killed and are on the wall?
Yes. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan ordered the names of 69 U.S. Marines on the wall who died in a plane crash in Hong Kong returning home from a relaxation trip. And there have been other exceptions made as well.
So they were on R&R, which is rest and recreation in the military, and they were like in Hawaii somewhere?
Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, and they were flying back to Vietnam to continue their service. They were killed, and they're on the wall.
Yes.
And the USS Evans sailors were sent out to do maneuvers, if I remember it, with how many ships? I can't remember.
There's like about 40 ships.
And then that accident occurred, and they're not on the wall because they claimed the political end of this, or whatever the issue is, claims that they were outside of the boundaries of the war. And that leads me to your title of the play that we're going to see in the second half, which is, what's the title of it?
The title is called There Are No Boundary Lines for Heroes. And I came up with that title because I learned that the Department of Defense criteria was that you had to die in the war zone and by enemy fire to be put on the wall. When in fact, before the accident occurred, they were on a lawn bombing mission supporting combat troops in the war zone. And before the accident occurred, they were going to go back. But sadly, the accident occurred and they didn't get their names on the wall.
So the title is very appropriate based on the facts that you have in this play that you're going to perform on our second half of this show. And I admire the energy and the enthusiasm that you are showing. After 40 years since the end of the Vietnam War, this is still not corrected. And your efforts, hopefully with the Evans Association, will bring that to conclusion, and those people will be added. Hannah, we're going to run out of time here before we actually get to the second half. So I just wanted to ask you, what age did you start getting involved in the Iowa State Historical program, where you won an award for the first play, which was what?
Mrs. Alita Sullivan, No Other Mother Gave More.
And that was about the 5 Sullivan brothers of Waterloo.
Yes. And
now you're working on this on and off. You've been to the Evans Convention. They've had people from Australia came over and watched your performance. You've been around the country with your performances on the Mrs. Sullivan, and you've been around for the USS Evans. And I'd like to personally, thank you for your efforts. At age 15 you started, and now you're a graduate from Cedar Falls High School, and you're still trying to help the veterans, and I appreciate you. Any final comments before we break for another episode part?
I just want to say that we should all continue to support the Evans efforts to get their 74 names on the wall, and that I don't think that the Evans should ever give up their efforts to get their names on the wall, because they fought for this country and they deserve the glory.
Good for you. We're going to take a break in this episode of Veterans of the Cedar Valley. Hannah's going to perform her play that won at the Iowa Historical Day, about the USS Evans in our second half, and come back and join us in our second half of this episode of Veterans of the Cedar Valley.
We all know that the Cedar Valley is a great place to live and work. And there are many individuals and organizations that are doing their part to improve the quality of life for everyone that calls this their home. On Serving the Valley, we sit down with these service organizations to learn more about different projects and events that need your support. We all need to do our part to help out our community. Tune into Serving the Valley to learn more.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
Welcome back to the second half of this episode of the Veterans of the Cedar Valley. Today my guest in the studio has been Hannah Ackerman, a recent Cedar Falls High School graduate, and Hannah's going to perform her award-winning play concerning the USS Evans, which was a ship that lost 74 crewmen, and she is helping the association with a campaign to get the 74 lost sailors on the Vietnam Wall. So at this time we'll have Hannah do her performance, and then after the performance we'll be back at the end.
The Vietnam War, 1959 to 1975, brought revolutionary change and outrage in this country. Vietnam War heroes returned home with little acknowledgement or honor. In the end, 58,272 names of war dead are inscribed on the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. But you won't find a single name of these 74 American heroes who all died together defending this country during the Vietnam War etched on that wall. But they should be. When you hear the story I'm about to tell, I'm sure you'll agree that the only reaction each of us should have is that of outrage. That today, in 2014, the names of these 74 men are still not on that wall. The crew of the Navy destroyer USS Frankie Evans DD-754 was sent by our government to Vietnam to serve and protect this country. The Evans ship, named after Brigadier General Frank E. Evans, USMC, served in World War II, the Korean War, and Vietnam conflicts. In 1969, after supporting combat troops on a long bombing mission in Vietnam, the Evans was sent to practice war maneuvers with 40 ships from other countries in the South China Sea called Operation Sea Spirit. This was part of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, or CEDO. A Royal Australia Navy aircraft carrier, HMAS Melbourne, led the group. On June 3, 1969, at 3:15 a.m., most of the Evans crewmen were sleeping. During a change of station maneuvers, the Evans and Melbourne ships collided. Tragically, the Evans was cut in half. Crewmen were jolted awake into darkness, chaos, and confusion. In just minutes, the front half of the ship rolled on its side and sank. These 74 men were pulled down the sea with the ship and were killed. The crew of the Melbourne quickly tried to help save lives of Evans crewmen. Of the 273 crewmen on board, only 199 survived. The body of Kenneth Glines of Independence, Missouri, was the only one found of the 74 killed. Mr. Steve Krause of California, an Evans accident survivor, shared his reaction what it was like that June 3rd morning. I had been on the ship for a very short time. I reported on board 14 May 1969 while the ship was providing gunfire support as support for a Marine amphibious landing. This was my third deployment overseas. My wife Donna was pregnant with our first son, so I was not thrilled to be gone, and I knew I would most likely still be gone when our son was born. When the accident occurred, I had a deep feeling of fear and realization that my life was in jeopardy. At first, my reaction was to get away from the ship as quick as possible. This goes against Navy training. In boot camp, they enforce staying with the ship since for the most part, they do not sink quickly. My next thoughts were, how was I going to be found? Keep in mind, it was completely dark. I was alone and had swam a long distance from the ship. I then felt relief somewhat when I could hear other voices in the distance. In September 2011, I performed at the 19th Annual Frankie Evans Association reunion at the Five Sullivan Brothers Convention Center in Waterloo, Iowa. I was presented a plaque, and they made me their youngest association member. I will always cherish this. I met President J.C. Campbell of Texas, Vice President Steve Krause, whose story I just shared, heroic accident survivors, former Evans crewmen, family, and friends. I also met Mr. Ron Baker of Australia, a Melbourne crewman who was there at the day of the accident. Mr. Baker said, to see the forward section of the USS Frankie Evans disappear into the sea was a heart-wrenching experience. To know that there were still men on board exacerbated the feelings of helplessness, disbelief, and horror. Unsinkable Sailors is a very detailed book written about the Evans accident by author Paul Sherbo, published by Patriot Media Incorporated. I asked Mr. Sherbo why he called the book Unsinkable Sailors. He answered, I think of the Evans crew as unsinkable in the way they bounce back from tragedy, also in the way they keep the memories of their lost shipmates afloat. In a sense, the crew sails on forever. On board the ship was a father and son, Lawrence John Riley Sr. and Lawrence John Riley Jr. Lawrence Sr. survived the accident. Lawrence Jr. did not. Also, 3 brothers, Gary, Gregory, and Kelly Jo Sage of Nebraska, were also on board. All 3 of the Sage brothers were killed. In the famous song, Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by singer Gordon Lightfoot, there is a line that speaks to that kind of loss. And all that remains is the faces and the names of the wives and the sons and the daughters. We now look back to 1969 to understand the Sage family's reaction to this terrible event. Hello, my name is Mrs. Eunice Sage. My husband Ernie and I married in 1946, and we live here on our farm in Niobrara, Nebraska. The good Lord blessed us with 4 wonderful sons, Gary, Gregory, Kelly Jo, and Douglas Dean. Oh, they were your typical boys growing up in the 50s. Playing football or just digging in the dirt. Oh, the dirt with 4 boys. But they were good boys, you know. After graduating high school one by one, Gary, Gregory, and Kelly Jo joined the Navy and proudly served together aboard the Frankie Evans. On June 3, 1969, it was lunchtime, so our daughter-in-law Linda and I brought Ernie his lunch out to the field. We had a pleasant visit, and later Linda left for home. Later, Ernie finished working, came into the house, and turned the TV set on to watch the CBS Evening News. Anchorman Walter Cronkite came on and reported that the Frankie Evans had an accident. He said that the ship was cut in half. All I could do was scream and scream. I heard our little Doug screaming, "My brothers! My brothers!" I was so distraught that I fainted. Ernie helped me come to. We did not own a telephone, so we got in our car and drove into town. We tried calling the VFW and Linda's parents for information. No one could tell us anything. We were desperate for any word, waiting all night. The next day, the military informed us that our 3 precious sons were gone. My 3 precious sons were dead. Family members kept newspaper articles like these from reaching us. President Nixon sent a personal message of sympathy. The day of the funeral was a blur. It seemed like the whole entire town of Niobrara was there. We were presented 2 folded flags, one for Gary and Kelly Jo, and Linda was presented one for Greg. When it was all over, none of us were ever the same. Years later, I attended the Evans Association reunions. This petition back in 2003, Fairness to All Fallen Vietnam Service Members Act of 2003, was presented at a government hearing. A letter of support from Lieutenant Colonel James Zumwalt, United States Marine Corps retired, was included in it. Similar bills were given to the House and Senate in 2003 and 2007. All attempts failed, and the bills died. I just couldn't understand why. I later learned that the Department of Defense criteria was that you had to die within the war zone and by enemy fire to be put on the wall. The Evans was here supporting combat troops in the war zone, then shortly after moved here where it collided with the Melbourne. A difference of 100 miles keeps these 74 men from being honored. I say there are no boundary lines for heroes. Yet there have been exceptions made for others who died outside the war zone and put on the wall. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan ordered the names of 69 U.S. Marines on the wall who died in a plane crash in Hong Kong, returning home from a relaxation trip. A reporter from Life magazine was kind to us and became a family friend. We allowed him to take pictures of our family. This one always breaks my heart. It's Ernie and little Doug crying after reading one of the newspaper articles. After the funeral, Ernie stopped farming. He lost his reason for living. He lost his smile. He just cried and cried so much. Poor Doug was only 7 and had a hard time accepting his 3 brothers' deaths. Ernie became so afraid Doug would be hurt too. He followed him around so close after the accident. He just didn't know what to do. When I hear this hymn, Nearer My God to Thee, I think of my 3 precious sons in this picture, a present they gave me for Mother's Day shortly before they died.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
Hannah, thank you very much for that performance on your play about the USS the Evans. Every time I've witnessed this play, even as an Air Force veteran, I get teared up, and I think what an injustice this has been. And with your efforts, Hannah, at attempting to get the names of the 74 sailors from this ship on the Vietnam Wall, you know, I'm just so proud of what you're doing as a young lady. And if people, Hannah, wanted to get in touch with you or the association for more information in an effort to help, especially Navy veterans, there's a contact information for the USS the Evans on the screen. Is that the best area to make contact with them?
Yes.
Okay. And anything else you'd like to say as we wrap up this show today?
I'd just like to say thanks for watching this performance, and it really means a lot. And continue supporting the Evans and their efforts to get their names on the wall. Okay, thank you. Very, very good job. And thank you very much for joining us on this episode of the Veterans of the Cedar Valley. I do want to say that after 40 years of attempting to get names on the Vietnam Wall, if anybody's going to accomplish it, it's going to be a 19-year-old young lady from Cedar Falls, Iowa. So thank you very much for joining us.